Right. Warm welcome to everybody, and thank you for joining us today. And for those of you that have been participating or been at CSW, I hope you've had an interesting week or so in terms of the events and the discussions that you might have participated in. And I know some of you have only just literally returned to the UK. Um, Today, we're going to look at training for inclusive peacekeeping. And we're privileged to have a really distinguished panel of people with us who got lots of experience, rich experience to share. And you will have all seen their bios in the Eventbrite invite page. And I'm not going to spend any time telling you all about them, but you can also see them in the chat, the bios, if you haven't looked at them already. But just to say that we have Lieutenant Colonel Ivana Maria Ferreira Costa with us from the Brazilian military. We've got Lesley Abdela, who's an award-winning consultant gender equality with 30 years experience, including in peace building and security. We've got Mark Knight, who's a seasoned peace process practitioner with over 25 years experience delivering security and human rights around the world. And Emma Berkang, who you were probably expecting to see here today, has unfortunately been detained in urgent work in Mali, so unable to join us. But Naila Salihu has also stepped in at the last minute and has joined us in terms of being part of our panel. So we thank you, Naila, and she is a senior researcher with lots of experience in terms of curriculum development and delivering training at the Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Center. So welcome to all our speakers. Just to tell you about the program for the day, what we're going to do is I'm going to share a number of questions amongst the panel, and we're going to discuss those questions for about the next 50 minutes. And then we're going to open up the floor to all of you to ask your questions or make your comments. So start thinking as we go along what you'd like to ask. And you can either let us know you want to participate in some way by either using the yellow hand function key button on the Zoom at the bottom of the screen, or you can raise your hand, or you can put your answer, sorry, not your answer, you can put your question or your comment in the chat, and we'll be monitoring the chat box. And I would ask you to be very brief so that we can get as many questions in as possible in terms of enabling all of you to be part of the discussion. Right, okay, just a little bit of scene setting from me. And I'm talking to you, I suppose, with my human resources management hat on, because that's my background, that's what I do, and I do a lot of change management. And we know that real change happens through actions and deeds. It doesn't happen through lots of nice policy papers and so on. We need them, but it doesn't actually happen. And today we're going to examine how training for inclusive peacekeeping is embedded in the deployment and the preparation of UN peacekeeping missions and activities, and extends throughout the delivery of the operation. It doesn't just happen before. And we're also going to look at building inclusive teams. And we know that teams, they have, including peacekeeping teams, they have to navigate shifting priorities, they have to navigate rapid transformation and pressures to stay aligned with their goals. And research, we know, shows us that when teams operate with shared clarity, with strong human connection and genuine accountability, they become significantly more agile. And agility is one of the strongest predictors of a sustained, effective team. And they're the teams that we all want to be members of. So then just to look back at the UN in terms of how it mandates for its peacekeeping training, it has mandates, and it covers across all military, police and civilian operations. And the training, if you like, is driven by the resolution 1325, and it's supporting resolutions. And the training covers conflict-related sexual violence, it covers gender-sensitive patrolling, it covers protection of civilians. And it utilizes lots of specialized modules, scenario-based exercises, and specialized advisors to ensure that the needs of women and girls are prioritized. enhancing operational effectiveness. But having said that, what I will also say is it's not to the exclusion of men and boys. When peacekeeping efforts reflect the unique needs, contributions, and perspectives of all people, their effectiveness in protecting local communities is much greater. Diversity of thinking about long-standing problems leads to more innovative and durable solutions. So we're going to explore the role of peacekeepers and the importance of building inclusive teams based on professional and mutual respect and working environments that enable women to develop successful careers. 25 years on after the Resolution 3025, the question before us is not whether women belong in peacekeeping, it is whether our institutions are doing or willing to do the structural work necessary to build inclusive, effective peacekeeping teams. So I'm going to now move to the panel. I'm going to ask the first question. I'm going to direct that to Naila, if that's okay with you, Naila. And let me just find my questions. Thank you. So what does inclusive training for peacekeepers mean to you? Can you share with us your approach to conducting gender peacekeeping training and what makes it successful? And in doing this, can you share a tangible example of where gender responsive training has led to implementation of better mission outcomes? You're going to get us started, Naila.
Yeah, thank you very much, Barbara. So I will share my perspective from the work that the Kofi Annan Development Peacekeeping Training does. The center is one of the regional training centers of excellence that has the mandate to provide capacity building through training, research, and policy dialogues to foster peace and security in Africa generally. So training is one of the key functions that we do here. So gender inclusiveness is something that is critical to the work that the center does. So the KIPTC's approach to inclusive peacekeeping training, to be specific, is done in several ways. So here the training methodology is based on, we try to make it a demand-driven trainings which are conducted to meet the changing needs of peace support operations generally. So such trainings are often designed through a very elaborate learning designing processes where we try to take findings from the research that we do here from the field and also conduct training needs assessments in specific countries or even institutions that we intend to train. So this training then are such that at least they are designed to meet the specific needs of the audience. So in doing that, participants are able to bring their experiences to the training because lots of them are personnel that are already working in their field. So we try to tap into their experiences to also how to make them better in what they do. So for us, gender is a cross-cutting issue in all the trainings that we do here. Though we have specific courses that are designed specifically for gender issues, but all other courses, peacekeeping courses, for instance, DDR, security sector reform, protection of civilians, advanced stabilization and reintegration, all of them have gender components. So in terms of how we do it, because our trainings are targeted at operational level personnel from military, police, and even civilian actors. So we try to make the representation of our participants to reflect achieve more of a gender representation as much as possible. And there had been challenges to getting the requisite number of even the female personnel to train over the years. For instance, the center has trained more than 20,000 people since its inception, but about 25% of these trainees are actually female. And this is partly because the institutions that we source the trainees from often do not have the requisite number to training. So even when you send nominations with specific instructions like send female, requiring institutions to send female participants, at times they may struggle. If you want to, you end up seeing the same people coming for all sorts of training. But when you want to also diversify the pool of persons that you are training. So in doing that, we try as much as possible to work with those institutions to bring in the females that we also want them to be part of the training, to make it very inclusive in the representation, even the use of trained resource persons. Often we insist on ensuring that trainings are conducted by both male and female resource persons to get a very diverse pool of resources. We've also kind of designed specific modules or courses that specifically target female-only participants because of the need to build their capacity in areas that we feel are lacking. So, for instance, we have a program called the Inspiring Women Leaders Program. So it's more of like a mentorship training that targets specific team leaders from the institutions that we work with. And also, as part of Ghana's efforts to implementing the MOWEP findings, so we've developed what we call the Gender Advisors course, where we take gender advisors from the Ghana Force and also other personnel from the region to also kind of give them some specific details that will help them to be able to implement or execute their roles as gender advisors at the institution level. And so how they're even able to translate some of these skills when they get deployed to peacekeeping missions. So KIPTC also, as far back in 2011, established the Women Peace and Security Institute, which is now the Women Youth Peace and Security Institute. So it's arguably one of the few centers in Africa that seeks to serve as like a knowledge hub for expanding technical capacity of women, especially through training, policy, and also kind of advancing women's advocacy on gender inclusivity in peace building processes generally. So this department has been leading lots of the interventions within the Ghana Armed Forces to support them in trying to implement the recommendations in the MOWEP assessment, which I'll speak about.
Thank you, Naila. That's interesting. It's interesting. You also may pick up the point that it's, the training should be delivered by men and women as a partnership rather than that it be a man or a female or a woman trainer. That's interesting. Okay, so can I come to you, Ivana, and ask you what you would like to add on to what Naila has said in terms of how we make it inclusive training for peacekeepers?
Definitely. So what I would like to add, when we come to the conception of gender responsive training, we come up with the concept of the gender responsive leadership, because the leadership understanding of the gender dynamics and the importance of add the gender lens in any training, it's key. Because if we think of the commander of the training centers, the commander of the battalion, the commander of the unity, if they do not have this lens, and just yesterday we had a dialogue with a former force commander from UNIMIS, where I had a chance to visit in the field, and then I saw, and then he said something that is very important. There is not other type of leadership other than gender responsive leadership. So if we have this mindset within our battalion commanders, within our defense leadership, so when we go to the training to prepare our soldiers, a uniformed personnel, regardless if it is police or military, and then if we insert this mentality within our trainings, and also as Naila said, because usually the ones who are in charge of delivering training for gender inclusive is female officers or female NCOs. So we see very, very little men conducting training for gender, because that's another thing that I've been fighting for, that the gender is not a women issues. Gender is men and women and anyone's issue. So if we and that's another thing that I've been discussing. we have to convince men in order to understand what is this gender dynamics and how to command with gender lens. So then we have to bring it to the classroom when we train staff officers, military observers, liaison officer, all the troops to be deployed in any part of peacekeeping is deployed. And then at this point, I believe that we have to go a little bit back, because there is a huge difference between training and education. And now we have been starting thinking that in having these training back to the military, the cadet schools, to the military schools, because then we are educating them. And then when they up to the moment to be deployed and they go to the pre-deployment training, they already have inserted this mentality. Because in education, we talk about beliefs and why it is important. When you go to the training, we teach them what to do and not to do. So for example, the first thing that I do when I've just done here in this military gender advisor course, because I'm very happy because we have 26 students and we have 18 male militaries taking this course. And then imagine how they're going to replicate what they're learning here, what they are internalizing here. So this idea of gender responsive training for me is, of course, as Naila said, is cultural sensitiveness, but it's also behavior sensitiveness. And the way we educate our male all over the world, because I've been just to a TOT, a military gender advisor, with many people from different parts of the world, and then we listen the same complaint. Just to give you an idea, I asked the first question. I asked everyone what motivated them to make part of this training to be deployed as a military gender advisor, not only the mission but also back to the unity. And then one guy said, "Well, I really wanted to know what's this because I have my bias, my prejudice." And the other one said, "You know what I heard when I said I'm going to a gender advisor course, and oh, you're going there to learn how is to be a gay or how is to be this." So there's a very huge misunderstanding with this word gender. And I usually say I'm not talking about the gender ideology. I'm talking about effectiveness, credibility, because when you are deployed, the majority of the population, the community that we serve, is made of women and female roles. So those are things that we need to internalize, and we need to go back in time and really put this training back to the military schools, to the cadet schools, to the recruit, like USG Christian Saunders, which is the head of the Office of the UN Response to Sexual Exploitation and Abuse system-wide. We have to repeat up to the moment it's part of their DNA, and we do not no longer need to have military advisors.
So what you're saying is that before we train anybody else, we've got to train the leaders.
That's it. Definitely. Because if I train here, but here there's no idea what is it, or it's not important. Leadership is key.
Leadership is key. Okay, thank you, Ivana. I'll come back to you in a moment. I'm going to go over to you now, Lesley. What would you like to add to the discussion that we've the things that we've talked about so far?
Right. I'm just picking up quickly before I start something that Ivana said about leadership and training the leaders. I find that quite a useful trick, if I can put it that way, is to have leaders at the beginning saying to everybody on the training why they think it's important and getting their commitment. Another thing that I used a lot are these, particularly with men in the group. They wonder what on earth I'm doing in sunglasses, and I've already asked them to bring along to the training their sunglasses, and I'll explain what that's for later. But it's, as the previous speakers have said, it's really looking through gender spectacles, and that's one of the reasons I use sunglasses, to illustrate that. But it's also to overcome some of the, oh God, why are we here on gender training aspects. I think all the gender training must be within the human rights framework. For example, UN Security Council Resolution 1325. And most of the gender training that I've done I was doing for over 10 years for the Swedish Armed Forces International Centre at the Lifeguard Barracks in Kungshagen, Stockholm, Stockholm, sorry. And I went over at least twice a year to do it. And the gender training sessions were for military, police, and some civil society from all around the world, 20 different nationalities sometimes. I remember one where I had Norwegian officers and a Saudi general in the same training workshop, which was interesting in some of the discussions there. And my training mainly has focused on CIMIC, civil military cooperation, and on DDR, demobilization reintegration. Those particular aspects of gender in those particular aspects. The sessions covered what, why, and how. The what is practical actions for how to incorporate gender considerations in CIMIC and DDR. Why integrate them, and what do we mean when we talk about mainstreaming gender? I'm happy to talk more about the methods later on in our discussion if people are interested, the methods we used. But basically it was, yes, the sunglasses, yes, dialogues, scenarios, games, presentations, and breakout in small group discussions. It addressed including gender in DDR for everybody involved in planning for disarmament, demobilization, reintegration, and considering the impacts, different needs of female and male ex-combatants, and taking into account the needs of their dependents. Increasing the women at all the decision-making levels. And when you've got fewer women than men, that has to be thought about how you're going to involve maybe civil society women leaders in the discussions and the planning. And taking into account all those sort of aspects. The UN used to call it Women Associated with Armed Forces, WAFs, and that's their term for former women combatants, meaning not only women who were active gun carrying, maybe in rebel groups or militias or frontline fighters, but also women directly associated with the fighters in any other role, such as the medics, the cooks, logistics, intelligence gatherers, family supports, etc. And another aspect that we included was the problems when male and female combatants return home. That's when trouble can really begin. Even in the UK, we know about people who've been traumatized after years of combat, and it can be difficult for ex-combatants to return to any normal lifestyle, and not nearly enough attention is paid to specific needs of women former combatants or WAFs, and often also the women who are receiving former combatants back into communities and families. Because I don't want to take too much time at this
I was going to say, if I can pause you there, Lesley.
Yeah, I'm just going to pass over. You asked one question, which I would like to include here, which was a tangible example of where gender-responsive training has led to implementation of better mission outcomes. And for me, a tangible example is our next panelist speaker, a former British military officer, Mark Knight. After hearing me speak, he became a role model, not because of me, but because he went off and he identified lessons he'd learned from DDR in Sierra Leone and put it all into action. He researched and wrote papers. He's applied the lessons in his work, and he's caused quite a difference, big difference, because of doing all these things.
Okay, well then perhaps we can
so
ask
I'm going
Mark
to hand over to Mark now
to tell us about Sierra Leone and some of the
and
techniques
actually, yes,
used.
I hope.
Thanks, Lesley. I love the intro. So to answer the initial question, what makes the good training? From my perspective, it always comes down to the impact. What impact of the program or the operation, and that is something that has to be monitored for the feedback. So into the training, there always has to be a feedback loop for future training, but for the people that are delivering the operation at the time. I recognize what the Colonel said about the different layers, that the senior commanders need to be educated, and it needs to be integrated in how they think and their idea of what they're delivering. And as peacekeepers, ultimately, they're delivering a concept of security, not for them, but for everyone else. And until and unless they understand that security is experienced differently by the body you're inhabiting, then they won't understand that. So that's an educational level. But in terms of training for soldiers that will deploy, they need repetitive processes and mantras that they will add to their existing ones. They're soldiers, they have processes of doing things, and they need to know on a peacekeeping mission, they do what they do and they add this. And the senior commanders need to know that this is important and ensure that it's done. But the key part of that, both for the operation, is that there's feedback, there's data coming into them on their impact on security, and that they retrain as they're there. And also for the education of the senior commanders in terms of what was done well and what was done not so well. A quick example of what is done well, my experience comes from impact, and trying to work it back through to understand why that impact was either good or bad. And I have lots of examples of bad impact, and we've tried to solve it. But, to keep the mood up, I'll give a quick example of good impact. Going to DDR, a few years ago, I was looking at the ongoing process of DDR, which is often comes under UN peacekeeping missions mandates in Mozambique, which wasn't a mission context. But my first walkthrough, I was testing the people that were doing it. I said, where are the women's toilets in the camp? We were in a camp. Where are the women's toilets? Immediately they said, over there. I was like, well, that's impressive. Where's the lighting for nighttime? We've got solar lighting there. 2 clear points. I was like, well, this is impressive. And it went on. Now, usually in DDR, you will have the beneficiary caseload, whatever they're called, or however you get them in a context is always controversial. But there's often a list from the group being demobilized. Because there were delays in Mozambique, DDR, due to COVID, then some of the people on the list had died by the time they got to the point where they're going to be demobilized. Now, I've done DDR twice before. I've demobilized 2 guerrilla groups. I've always, and my thought when I was looking at Mozambique was, go back to the political entity and ask them for new people. But what they did in Mozambique, they said, send us the wives of the dead beneficiaries. Because, and when I followed that back through, it went to, there were women in senior decision-making positions, making decisions about that and daily decisions on reacting. And they understood this as a different process to what I still at that point was understanding it as. They understood it in more holistic welfare, family perspective, as opposed to an individual being disarmed and going through a process. So in those good examples, I can take it back to women being in senior decision-making roles in the Mozambique DDR planning and execution. That was 4 minutes. I'll stop.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. And just staying, we started to look into outside. No, I'm not internalizing the training, but looking out and beyond. And obviously, the peacekeepers are faced with a vast range of decisions that they have to make on a daily basis, and some of them have to be made really, really quickly. But also, and we kind of already start looking at the fact that within the communities, people are impacted by the conflict in lots of different ways. And I remember when we were talking earlier, you were talking about some groups remain invisible because they don't want to be visible, because they feel safer if they're not visible and come forward and so on. Is there anything that we should be doing in the training to enable the peacekeepers to be, to pick up and be be cognizant of the fact that they've got to go out there and be proactive in terms of identifying what the needs of the communities are and then coming up with the solutions. Is there anything else you would like to add on that front?
Is that for me? Yeah.
Yeah, for you.
Yeah,
Mark.
I've developed this that I try and encourage people to do. There's 3 simple questions. When either you're reading a report, you're planning a mission or a program or an operation, and then you're delivering it. And then it's a cascading requirement of engagement. The first question is, where are the women? The second one is, how does this impact them? And the third one is, what do they say? So the first question, where are the women? You have to actually think, well, wait a minute, I'm going to do this. Where are the women? I don't know. You've got to think about it. How does this impact them? Then you have to have answered the first one to then start to conceptualize what is the impact. And then the third one requires actual assets, resources, time and effort and people. What did they say before you did it and when you did it? So those 3 simple things I would recommend, in training at the beginning. And every time the commander is given a plan, every time they come in from a patrol and they're being debriefed, these are the questions. Where are the women? How does this impact them? What did they say? And then you start to sort of like react. Quick answer.
Yes, no, that's great. I was going to come to Ivana now in terms of working on the ground. We're identifying what the issues are, but at the same time, on the ground, we have other institutions that are local. We have local police institutions and so on. How do we train peacekeepers or prepare peacekeepers to be able to work and embrace not just the people impacted by the conflict and what their needs may be, but how do we work with the local institutions so that we work in a holistic way?
Yeah, I'm going back very fast because I believe that there is an impact on this question that you have just made. Is these 3 questions that Mark has just brought to us, because those are the first thing that we have to think when planning the process, the operational process planning. And it's not as good. We just take for granted that we know the needs of the community, and then we prepare the operation. And then come back to your question. Something that I'm going to use example that I saw in the field, especially when I went to South Sudan last time. It's if we do not consider, especially the NGOs, because NGOs are the ones who are there before the conflict take over. They're going to be there during the conflict, and they are the ones who are going to be there when the troop leaves. So they know the whole scenario. They know, they have documents. They have a lot of they have documented a lot of problems that we think that we're not invented the wheel because they already know how to address. They just need to work in a very collaborative way. So I think that's the key thing: coordinate and collaborate with the local NGOs, local community, especially the leaders of the communities. That's where we understand what is the need of the community. Because again, I'm going back to Mark, and then Mark, your comment when you were working DDR in Mozambique, but there was also a process in DDR in Colombia, right after the FARCs, and right now in Haiti. There is a DDR officer that she's doing a great work there. It's just to bring the community the need, because everything that we do impact directly then. And when we made the question, where are the women, brought me to MONUSCO. We had the opportunity to go to a TOB, a temporary operational base. When we arrived there, a lot of barracks. And then the first question that I made, where are the female soldiers? And then they point out, oh, that barrack. And what about their toilets? Over the other side, and there's no lighting, there is no power. And then I was with Justice Saunders, General Mano, which is the OPSP, and a lot of other head of the mission. Then what about at night if they need to go to the toilet, which is far away? So there's no light, there's no anything. That's pretty much a strong opportunity for them to be raped, and nobody knew about it, attacked, and because we work a lot about the community that we serve, women in the community, but sometimes we do not look for the women in uniform that also feel, there are a lot of fears for them too. So I believe that it responds. We have to work in a full collaboration and full coordination with all the local communities, entities, UN country team, all the NGOs, because again, in transition, if you think of transition now in Mali, who are the ones who are there? UN country team and NGOs. If you thought of the transition, we are ready to start the transition planning for if MONUSCO leaves, we don't know when. We're going to leave Lebanon right now, but now the number of displaced people are increasing dramatically. We are now going to deploy another peacekeeping mission in Gaza Strip with 20,000 troops. We're going to deploy right now in Haiti 5,000 troops in April with the gang suppression force. But again, I'm going back to Mark with the 3 questions. Where are the women in this scenario? How is going to be the impact of the mission and the community with them? And how do they feel? I have a lot of other examples, but I'm going to stop here because I know that I want to give opportunity
Yes.
to
No, that's really interesting. And I'm going to ask Naila, is there something that you can add to that in terms of we're looking at the local communities? Is there anything you can add from your experience and your training in terms of how we equip the peacekeepers to be able to respond to the way in which conflict impacts women, men, girls, and boys in different ways? We're not, we're all different, and we're all individuals, but at the same time we come within groups. How do we equip them to deal with the impacts of conflict in different ways?
Yeah, as you rightly indicated about the differentiated impact of conflict. So it also informs what we need to emphasize on in pre-deployment training, for instance. For instance, with the Ghanaian soldiers, for example, I think that people see them to be very people-centered in their approach to peacekeeping because they try to endear themselves to host communities, especially in areas where they are deployed. So, and through that, they're able to build trust and be able to make them to able to relate effectively with the local population. So, certain themes are actually emphasized in their pre-deployment training. But for instance, training on cultural awareness, sexual exploitation and abuse, and also human rights protection and protection of civilians generally are some of the themes that are cross-cutting a lot of the pre-deployment training that is being developed for Ghanaian peacekeeping contingent. So I think this also kind of sharpen their skills to also kind of understand how to deal with the different needs of the people in the host communities, because obviously, when you have a very inclusive peacekeeping contingent, it's also makes it easier for them to be able to execute their mandates because different segment of population will have different needs that peacekeepers should have the right acquisition of, like the mix of the personnel to be able to respond to those needs at any point in time. So these are the things that Ghana has emphasized, which has kind of made them endear a lot of their peacekeeping contingent to wherever they are deployed, because people kind of praise the way they are able to relate to the community, and also it's also part of the training that they receive. Because for now, peacekeeping has also kind of served as a way of checking the behavior of even soldiers back home. So people will not want to do things that will kind of raise disciplinary issues with them, which kind of way affects their eligibility for peacekeeping participation. So in a way, it has a double-sided way of influencing how they behave at home, and also when they go to host communities, how they're able to execute their mandates that helps them to build trust within the local community, because a lot of them are often deployed in very hostile environments. So they need to find a ways that they can use to endear themselves to a local population.
So can I just follow up on that in the Malwip study? And I was, when I had a look at it, I was kind of surprised to learn well, some of the feedback that was given in terms of the attitudes of men in the peacekeeping missions towards women, and the fact that they weren't really of a view that the women should be part of the peacekeeping mission in the first place. That wasn't necessarily a role that they thought women should be performing, but at the same time, they made some very derogatory remarks and
Yeah.
sexual remarks and so on towards the women. And that was very much part of the malware assessment. So listening to what you've just said in terms of how the training, how do we deal with those attitudes in the training? How do we change those attitudes in order to be able to build those inclusive teams?
Yeah, changing attitudes and mindsets through training has been very difficult to, in terms of if you want to measure to what extent have the trainings that our military personnel have gone through over the years have contributed to changing the perception about the gender stereotypes when it comes to even inclusion of women. But I think it's once if we're able to transform the institutional culture itself, then it can transcend to the individual level of personnel, because once the institutional culture is very receptive and accommodative of the different roles that different genders bring towards ensuring effectiveness of peacekeeping missions, especially. And I think that can in a way change some of this mindset, because in one of the studies that we conducted, Ghana started deploying females, I think, in the 1990s, and increasingly we've seen the ripple effect of trying to meet the demands of peacekeeping on even the armed forces itself. It has compelled the armed forces to even recruit more women over the years. So currently, I think they say women form about 15% of the total population of the armed forces. So you can imagine these few women, and a lot of them are often found in support services, though there had been a modest effort at trying to ensure that at least women are able to rise to the top, but the level of the progression is very steady. So to what extent have this changed even the institutional culture? And from my experience, the armed forces itself, in line with international norms, is making effort at the level of the institution. But there's also a bit of resistance at the level of personnel, where now people even see this whole discourse about gender integration.
It's a huge challenge.
A competition between the male and the female gender, because now there's a lot of competition for opportunities. And when, for instance, when there's a slot and a female and a male personnel are presented as potential candidates, often the female tend to get ahead of the men. So the men are now feeling a bit threatened by the increasing needs to ensure that at least peacekeeping and other related institutions are very inclusive. So in a way, Ghana has made effort. For instance, as much as the UN sets the target for female inclusion in missions, I think about 15%. Ghana achieved, I think, 19% in 2023.
Right. So you've passed the UN target.
So we've met the UN target, but that doesn't necessarily mean that our institution, the military is completely gendered.
You've still got a long way to go.
Yes.
Those targets are not very ambitious. Given that we're in the 21st century, those targets should be much more ambitious. Okay, Lesley, you had your hand up. So before I ask you the next question, what?
Oh, no, don't worry. I can roll it up in it. Oh, well, I'll go quickly. So I just wanted to pick up on one or two things that were said. Or do you want to ask the question first, Barbara?
No, I'm just, well, it depends whether or not it's going to be coming up in the questions, whether you can add it into the questions, or is it a separate point?
Well, it would add into question 5.
Okay, well, what I wanted to explore a little bit more is looking at the UN sets the scene in terms of what sort of training needs to be delivered and so on. And I suppose I'm staying with the same thing in terms of changing attitudes. And we all know, in terms of the work that we've done as trainers, very often the training can be looked as an extra. It's added on the end. It's bolted on the end. It's not integrated, and therefore, you just it's an add-on. Okay, well, we've done that. Tick the box. So I suppose my question to you is, what more do we need to do in terms of making sure that it isn't an add-on?
Right. It's what I call overcoming the don't bother us with gender now, we're too busy. It's getting across, getting people to realize it's not a luxury optional extra. And one of the things I've used in training is to start always by asking the participants to draw up their own shopping list in groups, small groups, and to answer the questions, why bother with gender in DDR and CIMIC? And then they come back with the lessons that they've identified amongst themselves or any sort of resistance against it. We get them to discuss the examples amongst themselves and the issues to consider, identifying these parallel universes we've all been talking about, the women's universe and the men's universe in all this. And by getting the military and police themselves to discuss how they've handled it and share examples like Mark just did and like our colleagues, it comes better from them, and we can then work on and build on that. So I find that's very useful. And I'd like to give you Mark gave some positive examples, but examples that have come up from them of what happens if you don't do it. And I sometimes add examples as well. I'll give you just two. In a refugee camp on the Kenya-Tanzania border, somebody had the bright idea that placing single women in bright orange tents would offer them protection. Of course, it had the opposite effect. The easily recognizable orange tents, you can imagine what happened, led to many of the single women being raped. At the time of the Balkan War, in a football stadium in Tirana, an announcement blared out, anyone who's been violated, come and register here. And they would have had to walk across this big stadium in front of everybody. Just to quote a woman, sextortion is a big issue from peacekeepers and from their drivers and other employees, and it's not being handled. One woman actually said, everyone had sex in exchange for something. It was sextortion. It was very common. I was even offered sex if I wanted to get a basin of water to wash myself in the base camp where we were staying. And then my final example, which I think comes back to what our other colleagues were saying, is what we might call laddish behavior. And it happens in the UK armed forces too, as we know. Many women in the armed forces who've been the victim of sexual assault or have experienced serious sexual harassment are treated badly by their units, including the chain of command if they try and report it, and it's very difficult for them either to report it or to get anyone to have any understanding of how to support anyone who is being harassed or bullied. And so that's my final point on that is
no, they are excellent examples of how not to do it.
The other example is what I call the invisible gap that is not being handled, and we organised a conference recently on that, which is the survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. They're not I'm not being sexist here, but I'm just giving an example. Why is it that mainly male soldiers, but some of the female soldiers, are treated as heroes, and they rightly should be, but women who've been wounded in war from conflict-related sexual violence are treated at the very least as an embarrassment, and often even by their families and their communities as something that is totally not to be talked about, stigmatization, and if they have babies, they're stigmatized as well. And so I think, and this refers to rape, sexual slavery, forced prostitution, forced pregnancy, etc. I won't go on the horrors. We all know about it. But this is an invisible thing. And, we have all these bits of paper, but we need to make it that people are educated in the communities and in the military to change these attitudes. And
Yes.
it was coming out really very much in what our colleagues have just been saying.
No, that's
I won't take up more of the
absolutely.
time because
No, it's that it is what it has been, and let's hope that as time goes on, it will become more visible. But in terms of the what happens to women in conflict and how they're treated afterwards, in terms of basically being damaged goods and not, not even necessarily being
and
welcome
can
as
I just end
steadfast.
on a slight one country that's done a little bit to address this is Kosovo, interestingly.
Yes, yes,
And the women who come forward there are entitled to a pension.
yes.
And so we on Mark's basis, when I do like positive examples, so I was very happy to hear some. I think that's one to hold up, that
Yes,
to
yes.
start educating, and
But that very much came with the support and how those women were made to enabled to heal in terms of what had happened to them during the conflict. That was very much driven by the president at that time.
yes, who
So
was a woman, of course.
who was a woman? Who was a woman? Anyway,
I think Mark was
I've
trying
just
to
got a
say
couple of, before we open up the floor to the questions to the floor, I've just got a couple more questions I really want us to just
Sorry.
to touch on. I know we haven't got huge amounts of time, but Mark, I just wanted to come to you. I'm a firm believer in what gets measured gets done. And I know you alluded in your opening remarks to the need to monitor progress. And I just wondered if you could say a little bit more about what indicators or assessment methods that you've seen that are credible that will enable us to measure, if you like, the impact of how responsive our training methods are in terms of being gender focused.
Great. So I'm going to bring in another element of something I've done in the past where I was doing, as part of their human rights due diligence, doing human rights impact and risk and impact assessments on private security companies in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, to go back to mention the invisibility point, and it's probably even more so in the military, I think the men really don't see it a lot of the time. They don't see it. So part of the education of the senior commanders is important. The doctrinal activity for operations is important. But still, as I said, they need data. They need constant data coming back into them on this. And I found that a human rights risk and impact assessment on the mission, which allows for, as the Colonel said, is going to cover the internal environment as well. And also for the reason we did it for the companies, they don't know what their impact is unless there's additional resources committed to go out in a way that gets that data on what their impact is. If you have a battalion turn up in a village, there's an impact on security. Even if they don't leave their compound, there's an impact, and you don't know what it is because you're doing it. So to answer your question, I would say, because the military are culturally slightly ajar from their mainstream, societal culture, they're aware of that. They don't overly like externals. They don't overly like external criticism, and they particularly don't like anyone talking about human rights. As part of the training, I would train specific teams for UN contingents to constantly be doing the risk and human rights impact for them. Therefore, they are, in a way that they are valued as bringing good data to commanders, good data that from people they trust and know, and they bring these views to them, which will cover clearly, the gender aspect of it, both internally and externally. And that is an area that we know how to do. It's well documented. So adding that to missions that are doing peacekeeping, I think, would create that information coming in and keep it live and important in a way that they valued it. There you go.
Okay, now that's interesting. So, Ivana, last question to you. Do you have any observations to make in terms of leadership and what we've already talked about in terms of the importance of leadership and how we get leaders to prioritize the importance of building inclusive teams and what Mark's just said in terms of getting the intelligence to the commanders, that they value it?
Well, I've been thinking of this question because it's not an easy one, because right now, when I think of leadership, I don't think that gender inclusiveness or gender responsive has been a priority. All of us, we know that women with security agenda, all the things that are connected with it, like SCA, prevention of SCA, prevention of conflict relations related to sexual violence, GBV, all of them, they had withdraw of resources. So the last thing that is prioritized is gender training. And as gender responsive leadership is something that not so. I mean, it's been like 4 years that the Fort Bernadotte Institute Academy launched that training on gender responsive leadership. And one thing that I feel is, even though some leadership participate in a seminar like the one that we have in the Peacekeeping Training Center in Sweden, they have a seminar for gender issues, leadership in gender. I don't know how impactful it is on when they go back home and what they do, because again, I can see there's very little leadership right now, and I'm thinking of in terms of military leadership that has this mindset. And then I'm go back to yesterday. I was talking again with the General Mohan, and then that was one of the questions that I made him, how he motivates, or how he deals with the resistance that sometimes he faced with his battalion commanders and captains, for example, in understand the importance of the gender responsive leadership. And then he said, Ivana, it took me a long time to convince myself of it, and I am patient. And I usually address, when I address this to my soldiers, to my troop, is what is the mandate about? It's protection of civilians, and protect the civilian. We have, as my colleagues also mentioned here, the human rights that we have to protect. And if we think of human rights and human security, that's what it's about, protect women too. And that's why we have to have the lens. And I believe that's why Lesley mentioned that she wear the sunglasses, because we need to look at gender as a bigger lens, because it's all over. It's not because we are more than half of the population of the entire world, but it's because we are the ones, when I think we are, because I'm a woman too. We are the part of the world that are more impacted with conflicts. When everything goes wrong, women are the first. Women, boys, and girls, the majority, but women are if we think of Ukraine, what's taking place there, when we go to the displaced places, when we go to IDPs or refugee camps, or any vulnerable area, the women are the first one to be impacted. So there's not other way of consider human security and human rights if we do not have these gender responsive lens, this gender responsive leadership. So that's how I feel. I know that I didn't give you a concrete response, because it's not easy to say, but I think it takes time.
Yes.
And again, if every time I participate in any conference or any seminar or any course, I always count the number of men who are involved. So we have here Mark, and then we have someone from UN in Scotland, but it's very few men that are involved in this.
Yes.
When you go train facilitators, 100% women. Yes. And then we go to WPS conference, and then who are talking about this? Women, for the audience made of women. So this is another thing that we need to insert. This is not in women's shoes. This is everybody's shoes. This is everybody's responsibility.
It's a societal issue. It's not a women's issue. Absolutely. And we don't want to be sitting as women talking to ourselves. We want to be sitting in a room with men talking about how we see things, how they see things, and understanding each other.
Yeah, just last comment on it. Again, because yesterday I was talking about this. So if we think of in terms of commanding, if we think that everyone under our command needs to get the best, we need to get the best of our team. And in order to get the best of our team, we need to take in consideration everyone.
Yes.
Because and in this sense, we have to address gender our gender concerns. Because, for example, if we think of the health initiative that has helping us to have a better accommodation for women to be deployed, but then when we think only to better accommodation for women, and then we cause another problem for the men. Okay, what about the better accommodation for women? But what about us? So let's do it equally, because again, when we go to the field, the most important thing is to work shoulder by shoulder, equally in rights and also in an accountability. So that the balance needs to be done.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the one thing I would add to the question of training is training doesn't stop in the training room. Training is an ongoing process. And it doesn't matter whether you're having team meetings, one-to-one with your manager, or whether you're having assessment discussions in terms of performance and so on. Whatever conversations you're having, it always has to be part of that dialogue. It doesn't stop when you leave the training room. If it does stop, then the implementation doesn't happen. So it has to be an ongoing dialogue. Right, I'm going to ask you, Lesley, you've got your hand up. Yeah. One very quick point, and then I want to open up to the floor.
Very quick point, following on from the Lieutenant Colonel, about reminding people that I've used the sunglasses in training, not just for how to look at things, but to saying to particularly men, in many countries, they're in hot, warm countries where they're going to be wearing sunglasses. So anytime they see their sunglasses, by the end of the training, they should have a reflex that, oh my God, sunglasses, have we done anything about the women? And so it's a memory, whether you're out in the jungle or whatever. So it's just a little trick, but oddly enough, the feedback I've had is, oh God, it worked.
Yes. No, we all need little triggers.
And yes. If I can add just very fast, it's not only a ongoing process, but it should have also part of everyday conversation.
Yes, everyday conversation. Yeah, everybody should feel able to raise issues and call things out when they're not happy about things that they've seen. That's the kind of team we all want to work in. And that should be a daily conversation, as Ivana has said. It's okay. So we've got to normalize it. That's what the word I'm looking for. We need to normalize it. Okay. So Reese, Magali, I haven't got my little button at the top anymore in terms of looking for the questions. So do we have questions from the floor? Or
we have none so far, Barbara.
No hands up?
No, not right now.
And nothing in the chat?
No.
There's lots of things going on in the chat, but I can't see. I'm just looking to see if there are any questions. Okay, so can I put House of Scotland on the spot? Do one of you have a question for us? Reese, Magali?
Yep. Sorry, bear with me. I had a question written down.
Sorry to put you on the spot, but I know you have lots of questions.
Yep. Oh dear, I had a load written down. A really interesting discussion. Yeah, I was wondering, what kind of practical tools have you seen that really kind of help to turn the gender equality commitments from policy into everyday practice? I know we've touched on it a little, but if you could expand on that, please, that'd be really interesting.
Who would like to take that question?
Can I give a quick example?
Okay.
To answer the question directly, you need women in senior decision-making roles, is the simple answer. Because they see the world differently and they'll see answers differently. Simple. But an example, just to quickly go back from when I did a review of a private security compound in Iraq. I mean, they felt they were responsible for all their staff. But I always went, there's only two of us, I always went with a woman, and the woman went off and did, conversations with women that were around and came back with data that I could never have got. And one of them was on the guardhouse, as you entered the compound, they had a woman there, guard in the uniform, with a special area where they could go and search women, which was all, it seemed to be, they were thinking about it and trying to comply. But it turns out that woman didn't drink water all day because there wasn't a toilet she felt safe going to. Now, when I told them that, it's information you leave immediately, you don't write it in a report. They were outraged with themselves to go and try to sort it out. But a few years later, or however many times later, I was working with a woman in the Rohingya refugee camps. And I was telling her this story. She said, "Oh, it's funny. I do that as well. If I have to go into the camp working, which I'm there all day, I don't drink." And I was like, "Oh, so this is really common. This is really common thing that no one sees, right?" But the impact, a few months later, I heard that my colleague from the Rohingya camp had to be evacuated medically to have kidney stones, or kidney stones removed because of a constant dehydration. So there's a physical impact to not seeing these. And we have to put resources into it to take off the glasses, Lesley, to find the data and get it to the people that make decisions through a route that they will accept that information, basically. There you go.
Thank you, Mark.
Can I pick up on that?
Yes, by all means, Lesley.
Because I was going to say this anyway, but it fits in with what you just said. You said resources. I would add budget. One of the issues on DDR is often there's not a budget for impact on women or women themselves, who, if they're not formally combatants or formal part of military, even if they, so, but if you look at the budget, how much is going to be spent on men and women? This is one of the big issues, the small amount of money, if any, that's set aside for that. And that goes for paying for the loos as well.
Yes. No, there has to be
and for sanitary protection, which gets forgotten as well.
Dedicated budget for training. It can't, comes back to the question you talked about earlier. It can't be an add-on. It has to be, budget has to be, provision has to be made. Can I come to you, Naila? There's a question in the chat which you might be able to help us with, and it's from Nikki Culpin. And the question is, what different skills do you see women bring into the peacekeeping process? How do you think we can get people on the training to recognize those skills?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think there's women bring a different set of skills to meet the requirement of a typical multidimensional peace operation, for instance, because in that environment, you have different actors performing specific functions. So, for instance, if you need to do like a body search of a local population, we're not going to use males to search maybe female population. You need to have females with the requisite skills that can do that. So women are also very good at making good decisions, which are on the way kind of influence or informs how mandates can be kind of practicalized to meet the needs of the civilian population. So I think there are unique ways that women contribute to mission effectiveness because of the specific roles that they will be playing to support or achieve or provide the security needs of the divergent population that will be existing in a typical host community.
Thank you, Naila. That's a very good example. Ivana, have you got anything from your experience that you could enlighten us about in terms of what skills, specific skills women bring to peacekeeping that would be remiss for us not to have there?
Well, first, I always say that sometimes people say, oh, women bring their, the different perception that we have. We pay more attention to the details. We also interact better with local community. I don't think it's something that is part of being a woman. I think it's part of the skills that you develop throughout your career. But one thing that I think is very important, as Mark raised it too, if we had more women in position of decision maker in the decision, in the table of decision, maybe we could address better a lot of different issues. But the problem that we do not have, at least in the field, if you visit and then you go to see U1, U2, U3, all the U's are men. Usually women have the position of military gender advisor or the medical officer, these traditional roles. That's why I usually say that we should have much more male military gender advisors and more female chief of staff, force commanders, logistics, intel, and we have this expertise. What we really need is the opportunity to be there. We know that we have this gender parity strategy that was launched by United Nations in 2017. It was renewed last year because they have realized that just established as a percentage of women is not enough to really create in the member states, the PCCs and TCCs, the perception that we need to include women in high level positions, in decision make positions, because if it's not, we're going to be just in the back of the chairs of the main tables, and in this position it's very rarely that we have a chance to really advise in what we have, even the way we feel as women, and again, maybe if one day a first commander arrive and say, where are the women? Oh, they're in the back. Why they're not at the main table?
Yes.
Which is, yes. And also even men that have this responsive leadership mindset, sometimes I'm going to use the Justice Saunders again. One day he was invited to deliver a few words about how to prevent sexual exploitation and abuse. And then when he entered in the room of the meeting, and then he looked at it, where are the women? And then he said, oh, you know what? I'm sorry. So I cannot stay here, because how come if we talk about policies to increase the participation of women in high-level positions, and in this high-level meeting, we do not have a woman to represent? So I'm sorry, I'm leaving. So maybe we need also this kind of behavior. And because we need men as allies. If men that is, traditional in position of power do not have this mindset, where are the women? Where are the professionals that are the same level that we are? If they're not represented here, how come we can continue doing it?
And if we look at some UN women statistics, looking globally, I know it'll be different in different countries, but at the moment, only 10% of UN uniformed peacekeeping personnel are women. 10%. And
in fact, it's just because if we think of military advice, military observers, staff officers, and police has already reached out more than 30%.
Slightly higher. That's slightly higher. That's 21%. But the actual, the people that are invited to join the missions, if we're still only such a small percentage, then we're not there to be part of the missions. So our next challenge is, how do we recruit more women? How do we change the mindsets to recruit more women into the military, into the police, so that when you come to select for and putting together a peacekeeping mission, you've got the women there that you can call upon to join the mission. At the moment, they're not there.
That's what I used to say, but very fast here. If we have a job slot, and then we have Mark and Ivana, both of them, let's analyze their curriculum. And that is, I'm not saying that women needs to go just because there's a woman, because we have a lot of women with the same curriculum expertise, but they're not chosen, they're not picked up. Yeah.
So we've got some issues to tackle around recruitment. And that's probably another area where we've got to do a lot of training to recruit people, how to recruit. Lesley, you put your hand up.
Yes, it was to do with what you're saying, but from a different perspective in DDR, the reintegration of former combatants who may have been in the militias, but not in the official military. So to say what skills, then they're just sort of sidelined. And to give an example of women took control themselves in Eritrea, and they had been repairing trucks and driving trucks and cars, etc. And they set up a women-run business doing just that. But the men who were sort of helping with reconstruction or reintegration stuff wouldn't have noticed or even thought about that. They just, when the reintegration comes of the former combatants in militias and things, the men may get offered career opportunities, but often the women are just left out there to flounder. And of course, they end up in really very vulnerable situations.
Yes, yes.
So that is an area to think about.
No, there are a significant number of challenges that we kind of, we know are out there, but it's finding the solutions and the people to actually champion those solutions in terms of pushing them and taking them forward. Okay, I'm going to ask again, Reese, Magali, have we got any more questions?
No, and no hands are currently up.
Okay,
I
right.
just quickly add something to Leslie's point there then.
Yes.
As it was just, you've mentioned a couple of times on the DDR, disarmament, demobilization, reintegration. Within UN missions, traditional peacekeeping, it used to be, a civilian activity and post-conflict program, which we messed up, from 2000 onwards. And we're still messing it up because now it's evolved in the UN mandates into more stabilization, which is deployment into ongoing conflict, which often means that it's surrendered combatants, and the old problems are still ongoing. I was in northeast Nigeria a while back, looking at the international supported reintegration process for surrendered Boko Haram, and it was during an armed conflict. There was international expertise supporting the reintegration, but it'd been going on for 2 years before I pointed out that there are only men, 100% men in the reintegration process for ex-combatants. The women at the point of entry for that program were told to walk to the nearest town where they became IDPs, and clearly massively increased their vulnerability because they were possibly abducted. They certainly weren't going home. There was no help to get them home. So we keep making the same mistake. The context changes, our mandates change, but we still are blind on these issues. And the solution specifically for this arena of peacekeeping, and the military aspect, is to make it a valuable role that is specific when units go on peacekeeping, that the people that are doing the external gathering of data, the impact assessments are valued, that people fight to get those roles on peacekeeping missions. And those teams are always, one man and one woman always working together. So you get that perspective. Then as that unit goes forward, they'll know that, if they're going on a UN mission, people from outside the unit, but within their military culture, will want to come with them, will want to get that role, and their data will be valued. And then they'll start constantly to be told, you're blind on this, you're blind on this. Your impact on security is negative. You're having the opposite impact of what you want. And they, as soldiers and as people committed to, whatever their mandate is within the UN, will try and alter it. But it's the constant updating of information and understanding their impact. And the data has to be valued by them.
Yes, absolutely agree with that. Okay, well, we're coming towards the end now, unless we've got any last minute questions. Yes, I've got one here from Pat Black, and she's asking us, have any of you, okay, it's something, just go back, it shut itself down. Have any of you experience of reintegrating child soldiers? And if so, what way can this be supported? Does anybody have any experience of?
There are a lot of child soldiers, children associated with fighting forces in Sierra Leone, and it requires specialist agencies to take that on as a completely different process to the mainstream process, because their vulnerabilities are, so much more pronounced and so much layered. I'd quickly add to that, although from the experience that Lesley was talking about when we tried to do the reintegration correctly in Asia, in Aceh, the solution is women need a completely different process of reintegration as well. They know what to do, they know how to handle it, they'll take more autonomy and they need less visibility. So you actually need three different streams or concepts on the DDR side for reintegration. One
Yes.
for men, one for women, and one for children. And they're all completely different.
And maybe that's the subject of our next event, because I think that's probably a whole discussion in its own right. So maybe that's our next event. So if stand by your phones, because I might be on the phone and saying, can you come back? And we're going to have another event to discuss to discuss child shoulders and their reintegration. Okay, so I'm going to wind us up now, and I'm going to come back to the panel, and I'm going to ask them for a final thought in terms of what is one action or commitment do you believe institutions involved in peacekeeping must make to build inclusive, performance-driven peacekeeping teams? What's one action that we should all take away with us, that we should advocate for in terms of what peacekeeping, what institutions should be doing to better build inclusive peacekeeping teams? Who wants to go first?
Okay, I think I can come in here.
Okay.
Yeah, I think troop contributing countries need to dedicate adequate resources towards transforming their military and also security institutions in terms of ensuring gender inclusivity. Because for instance, in the case of Ghana, there had been considerable policy development, but we need the states to commit themselves with the adequate political will and also the resources to ensure the implementation of these policies. For instance, in Ghana, because of having gone through the MOWEP and the subsequent funding that was made available to the ELSO initiative, you see a lot of initiatives being done, a lot of rewiring infrastructure to make it more accessible to female representation. But the question is, what is the sustainability of some of these initiatives? Should the funding that is coming from the ELSO initiative eventually cease? This is where the role of the state is essential. So the state should be able to commit resources into those institutions to make them more effective in the way that they implement the gender policy and also the institutional structures that they've initiated to increase or make their institutions more receptive or responsive to the needs of their female personnel, also how they even execute their missions in a way that makes them look more inclusive in their outlook and in their functions as well. So that's what I want to add.
No, that's an incredibly important point in the sense that we can't do it. We can't make the changes with our hands tied behind our back. We need to make sure that there are dedicated resources that are needed, including, as we said earlier, budget to enable us to make the changes that need to be made. So that's really important. Thank you, Naila. Who wants to go next?
I would like to. Yes, I think that I'm going to go up in terms of country. I think that what we need to really have this inclusive, everyone we call is the full implementation, what all the policies that we already have in hand. I really think that we do not need more policies. The policies are there. If you think of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, almost 26 years after the Resolution 1325 was launched, a lot of national action plans. But I think that if we think of Brazil, we need to implement it fully, but full with resources and as a political document, as a law. And then if it's a law, everybody needs to do it. So I think that what we really need is the implementation, the right implementation of all the policies that we already have in place.
That's music to my ears, Ivana, because I actually think it's all got to be about implementation. We've got enough words on paper. We don't need any more. And I wholeheartedly agree. Okay, so Mark, Lesley.
I'm sorry for
the one thing I'd do, I'd require that. Sorry,
Mark, I'm so sorry because I have to leave now because I have a class to deliver. But thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Ivana, for your time and joining us. And I'll catch up with you. I'll catch up with you later in terms
Thank you.
of
Bye-bye.
bye for now.
The one simple thing, I'd require unit commanders to report monthly on their impact on human rights, and then give them the resources to collect that information.
Absolutely. That's an interesting one. So how would they collect that information?
I would, as part of their pre-deployment training, there'd be attached, teams would be attached to them. Gender balanced teams would be attached to them that would have gone through their training on how to identify human rights risks and how to gather the data on whether those risks have actualized, and then feed them back into the command chain. So it's like on certain deployments, units will have someone go off and become a dog handler for security for that deployment only. It's the same thing. People go off, they get trained to do this role, they come back and they deploy with the unit. And then the commander has to report on that impact every month.
Okay. And we all see things, so we all have a responsibility to report. Lesley, you're last but not least in terms of what's your one takeaway for us that we need?
I like Mark's very much. I think that's a good one. And within it, or linked to it, is addressing sextortion. I know I'm keeping on about it, but and that links to recruitment, which is what you said, because however nice you put the ads, recruitment ads and all, who would want to join an organization where you're continually seeing on social media and everywhere how there are cases of sextortion throughout the organization? It has to clean up its act publicly on this.
Yes.
Which is part of human rights, of course.
Yeah, I was going to say it comes under that umbrella.
But I agree with you. It's implementation.
Yes.
There's over 100 countries, I just looked up, have now got national action plans on 1325. Yes, civil society are doing it, but not military and not governments, frankly.
Yes.
It really has been not the success it should be. It's not got the budget, the clout, and as you say, the commitment from those in high places.
Yes. Okay, so that's our final word in terms of where we're going to leave it. And on the screen, you will see that there's a contact us email address. So if anybody has any issues or anything they'd like to know more about, or where they can go and find out more information and so on, please email us, and that box will be live for the next couple of weeks, and we will respond to whatever questions are put in there. And I want to just thank you all for joining us. I hope it's been a useful afternoon for you in terms of our discussion. It has indeed for me. I think it's been a very rich and fruitful discussion, and I think there's a lot we can take away and work with in terms of whatever it is that we're doing in terms of our day-to-day activities. And also to say on the national action plans in Security Women, we have a website, but on one of our pages, we've got all of the national action plans. And if you click on the flags, you can find out what's going on in the different action plans fitted in different countries. And some are doing more than others in terms of their commitments and what they put into the plan. But on the other hand, you look at the plan and I don't know how much of it is being implemented, because it comes back to that, monitoring and monitoring progress and how effective we are in terms of the impact that we're having. But anyway, just if you want a quick reference point for the national action plans, you will find them on the Security Women website. So once again, thank you all for coming, and wherever you are, have a lovely afternoon, evening, or maybe some of you it's the morning, I don't know. But anyway, whatever time of day it is, have a good day. And thank you to the panel in terms of your time that you've given us today.